The morning mist still clung to the hedgerows when Oberleutnant Klaus Richter first saw it, an American M4 Sherman tank, abandoned at the edge of a cratered field near Cannes. Its olive-drab paint was scorched black in places, and the left track hung loose like a broken chain. But what struck Richter most was the eerie silence. No flames, no smoke, just stillness. "Another American coffin," muttered Unteroffizier Hans Weber, his weathered face showing the exhaustion of 3 weeks of brutal fighting. Good riddance. But Richter wasn't so sure. He'd seen dozens of destroyed Shermans in the past month, twisted metal husks that had met the fury of German 88mm guns or the dreaded Tiger tanks. This one was different. It sat there, wounded but somehow defiant, like a boxer on one knee, waiting for the bell. "Get the recovery crew," Richter ordered suddenly. "I want this one intact." Weber's eyes widened. "Sir? We barely have enough fuel for our own panzers. Why waste it on American scrap?" Richter approached the Sherman, his boots crunching on spent shell casings. He ran his hand along the hull, feeling the rough welds and rivets. "Because, Weber, we keep destroying these things, and they keep coming, wave after wave. For every Sherman we knock out, 5 more appear. I want to know why." What Richter didn't know, what couldn't know in that moment, was that this single captured tank would reveal a secret so profound, so unsettling, that it would haunt German military reports for the remainder of the war. A secret that had nothing to do with armor thickness or gun caliber, but with something far more terrifying: American industrial philosophy. By nightfall, the Sherman had been towed to a makeshift Wehrmacht testing facility 30 kilometers behind the lines. A converted French machine shop that now served as Germany's frontline laboratory of enemy technology. The building's windows were blacked out, and guards stood at every entrance. Whatever happened here stayed classified. Inside, a team of 5 German engineers waited, their faces illuminated by harsh electric lights. At the center stood Hauptmann Friedrich Steiner, a former Porsche engineer who had designed components for the Tiger tank. He was a man who appreciated precision, elegance, and the German way of engineering where every millimeter mattered, where tolerances were measured to the thousandth of an inch. The Sherman was rolled into the facility at 2,300 hours. The engineers circled it like surgeons around a patient. "Gentlemen," Steiner began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, "High Command wants to understand why these tanks are so effective, despite being, and I quote, inferior in every measurable way." He pulled out a document stamped with red GEAIM markings. "Our Tigers can destroy them at 1,500 meters. Our Panthers can pierce their armor like paper. Yet still, they overwhelm us. Tonight, we find out why." The youngest engineer, a 23-year-old named Johann Kirsch, who had been recruited straight from university, raised his hand. "Sir, permission to speak?" "Go ahead. I've read the field reports. The American crews call it the Ronson lights, first time, every time. They know it's a death trap. So why do they keep fighting in them?" Steiner's expression darkened. "That, Kirsch, is exactly what we need to answer." The examination began at midnight. The team started with the obvious armor thickness. Chief Mechanic Otto Brenner, a man whose hands were permanently stained with grease, took measurements with calipers. "Glacis plate, 51 millimeters at 56 degrees, he announced. "Side armor, 38 millimeters. Vertical." Steiner frowned. "Our intelligence was correct then. A Panther has 80 millimeters frontal armor. Even our Panzer IV has better protection. Yet they don't seem afraid," Brenner noted quietly. Next came the gun, a 75 millimeters M3. The team carefully examined the breech mechanism, the recoil system, the ammunition storage. Penetration at 500 meters. Steiner consulted his notes, approximately 90 millimeters against vertical armor. Respectable, but our 75 millimeters KIK 42 on the Panther achieves 138 millimeters at the same range. "Inferior in every way," Weber muttered, echoing the official assessment. But then something strange happened. As they continued the inspection, small details began to accumulate, details that didn't fit the narrative of American inferiority. Kirsch was examining the engine compartment when he called out, "Hauptmann, you need to see this." The team gathered around as Kirsch pointed to the engine mounting system. "Look at how the entire power plant is designed. It's modular. These bolts here, they're standardized. You could remove this entire engine with a basic toolkit in under 4 hours." Steiner blinked. 4 hours? To change a tank engine? Yes, sir. And look here, the transmission, the final drives, all designed for rapid field replacement. Brenner, the veteran mechanic, ran his weathered hands over the components. His face had gone pale. "Mein Gott, this isn't a precision instrument. It's a system." "What do you mean?" Steiner demanded. "On our Tigers, changing an engine is a 2-day operation requiring specialized tools and a workshop. On a Panther, removing the transmission means dismantling half the tank. But this..." Brenner's voice trailed off. "This American machine is designed to be repaired by idiots with wrenches. Everything is accessible. Everything is replaceable. It's brilliant." The room fell silent. These were men who had been raised on German engineering, the belief that quality meant precision, that superiority came from tighter tolerances and better materials. What they were seeing violated every principle they held sacred. "There's more," Kirsch said, his voice shaking slightly. He held up a component. Every bolt, every nut, every screw, completely standardized. "I found this transmission part, and look, it has a part number stamped right on it. I checked the manual we captured. Any Sherman mechanic can look up this number and know exactly what it is and where to find a replacement." Steiner felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. "Show me the manual." Kirsch handed over a worn, grease-stained technical manual titled TM 9 to 731 amperes, M4 Sherman Medium Tank Maintenance and Operation. It was written in simple English, with clear diagrams and step-by-step instructions. There were no complex calculations, no engineering degrees required, just straightforward procedures that any trained soldier could follow. "This is..." Steiner struggled for words. "This is a manual for simpletons. There's no depth, no sophistication." "Exactly," Brenner whispered. "That's the point." At 0300 hours, after 3 hours of examination, Hauptmann Steiner called for a break. The team gathered around a table covered with disassembled Sherman components, smoking cigarettes and drinking cold coffee. "Impressions?" Steiner asked, though he already knew the answer he would receive. Weber spoke first, his voice carrying the contempt of a frontline veteran. "It's crude, welded like a truck. The armor layout is basic. The gun is adequate at best. I've seen better engineering in a farm tractor." But Brenner disagreed. "You're not seeing it, Hans. This tank isn't designed to be better than a Tiger. It's designed to be everywhere." "What do you mean?" The old mechanic stood, pacing like a professor before a lecture. "Look at our tanks. A Tiger is a masterpiece, complex, powerful, nearly unstoppable when it works. But when it breaks down, it needs a factory to fix it. Special parts, trained engineers, weeks of work. The Americans," he gestured at the Sherman, "they built this tank to be fixed by anyone, anywhere, with whatever's on hand." Kirsch pulled out a notebook, his hands trembling slightly. "I did some calculations based on the field reports. For every Tiger we produce, the Americans make 20 Shermans. For every Panther, they make 15. But it's not just production, it's maintenance. A damaged Sherman can be back in action in days. A damaged Tiger, weeks, if ever. Quantity has a quality all its own," Steiner murmured, quoting Stalin. "The Russians understood this, but I thought the Americans, we thought they would fight like us." Brenner interrupted. "With pride in craftsmanship, with engineering excellence. Instead, they're fighting with mathematics, with logistics, with systems." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery. Each man was confronting the same terrible realization. They had been judging the Sherman by the wrong criteria all along. Dawn broke over the testing facility, but none of the engineers had slept. They couldn't. What had begun as a routine technical evaluation had transformed into something that felt almost like an autopsy, not of a machine, but of their own assumptions. Hauptmann Steiner stood before the disassembled Sherman, a cigarette burning forgotten between his fingers. Around him, components were laid out in neat rows: transmission parts, suspension springs, track links, engine components. Each piece told the same disturbing story. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion and too much coffee, "we will now conduct field tests. I want to see this tank perform under combat conditions." Otto Brenner, the chief mechanic, had already reconnected the engine. "It started on the first try," he reported, and there was something almost accusatory in his tone. "The fuel system is primitive, but effective. Gravity-fed with a simple primer. No finesse, but it works." "Everything about this machine just works," Kirsch muttered. The young engineer had dark circles under his eyes. "I counted 47 major components last night. 47 pieces that can be replaced without specialized tools. On a Tiger, that number is 12. 12 components designed for field replacement. The other 200 require workshop facilities." Weber checked his watch. "The test range is ready, Hauptmann. We have targets set at various distances. I've also arranged for a Panzer IV to run comparative trials." "Good," Steiner nodded. "Let's see if American simplicity can match German precision." The test range was a barren field scarred by months of artillery practice. Makeshift targets, old French tanks, concrete bunkers, wooden mock-ups dotted the landscape. A morning fog rolled across the ground, and in the distance, the perpetual rumble of the front lines reminded them that this war was far from over. The Sherman rumbled onto the range, its engine producing a distinctive high-pitched whine that was nothing like the deep growl of German tanks. Weber sat in the driver's position, his face visible through the open hatch, while Brenner operated the turret. "First impression," Steiner called out, standing beside the tank with a notebook. "Driver's position?" "Spacious," Weber admitted grudgingly. "I can move freely. The controls are smooth hydraulic steering, not clutch and brake like our Panzers. It's easier." "Too easy, almost." Steiner made notes. "Gunner?" Brenner's voice came through the open commander's hatch. "The gun stabilizer is remarkable. It's crude, only vertical axis, but it actually works. I can keep the gun on target while moving. On our Panzers, we must stop to fire accurately." "Impossible," Weber said. "No one can fire accurately on the move." "Try me," Brenner challenged. "Target at 300 meters, 11 o'clock. Start driving." Weber put the Sherman in gear and began moving at moderate speed across the rough terrain. The tank bounced and swayed. Through his binoculars, Steiner watched the turret and felt his stomach tighten. The gun barrel remained eerily steady, compensating automatically for the hull's movement. Boom! The 75mm gun fired. At 300 meters, the target, an old Renault tank hull, sprouted a neat hole in its side. "Mein Gott," Weber breathed, bringing the Sherman to a halt. "That shouldn't be possible." "But it is," Steiner said quietly. He looked at Kirsch. "Explain." The young engineer consulted his notes, his voice shaking slightly. "It's called a gyro stabilizer. The Americans adapted it from naval gun mounts. It's not perfect. It doesn't stabilize the horizontal axis, but it allows them to fire effectively while moving at up to 15 kilometers per hour. Our tanks can't do this." "None of them." "Why not?" Weber demanded. "Why haven't we developed this?" "Because it's imprecise," Kirsch burst out. "The system has play in it, tolerances that would make any German engineer sick. But in combat, at typical engagement ranges, it's accurate enough. That's the pattern. Everything about this tank is accurate enough." Steiner made more notes, his handwriting growing increasingly agitated. "Continue testing. I want to see reliability." For the next 4 hours, they pushed the Sherman hard. They drove it through mud, over obstacles, up steep inclines, They fired the gun repeatedly until the barrel was hot enough to shimmer in the air. They ran it at full speed across broken terrain, and it never stopped. The Panzer IV they'd brought for comparison broke down twice, once with transmission trouble, once with a thrown track that took 40 minutes to repair. The Sherman kept running. "This is impossible," Weber insisted, slamming his fist against the hull after the 4th hour. "No tank can sustain this kind of abuse without maintenance." But Brenner was looking at the engine compartment, his weathered face troubled. "Look at the oil pressure gauge. Look at the temperature readings. Everything is well within normal parameters. This engine, this 4GAAV8, it's designed with massive tolerances. Parts can wear significantly before performance degrades." "That's not engineering," Weber protested. That's acceptance of mediocrity." "No," Steiner said softly, a terrible understanding dawning in his eyes. "It's acceptance of reality. Our Tiger engines are Marvel's 1,200 horsepower, precision-built Maybach masterpieces, but they require constant maintenance, special oil, careful operation. This American engine," he gestured at the Sherman, "this is a truck engine. Simple, crude, but it runs on almost any fuel, tolerates neglect, and can be operated by conscripts with minimal training." Kirsch pulled out a captured document, an American Army training manual. "Listen to this," he read aloud. "The M4 Sherman is designed to be operated by average soldiers with average mechanical aptitude. Complex repairs should be left to depot facilities, but field maintenance can be performed by the crew with standard tools." He looked up. "They're not trying to make the best tank. They're trying to make a tank that any crew can keep running." "But why?" Weber asked, though his voice had lost its earlier certainty. No one answered, because they were all beginning to understand, and the understanding was terrifying. At noon, they conducted the final test, the one that would haunt Steiner for years to come. "I want to see how quickly this tank can be repaired under field conditions," he announced. "Brenner, you will simulate battle damage. Remove the engine." "Sir, you heard me. Remove the entire engine assembly. I want to time how long it takes, using only the tools stored on the tank itself." Brenner's face went pale, but he nodded. He gathered 2 other mechanics men who had never seen a Sherman before yesterday, and they set to work. Steiner clicked his stopwatch. The team worked in silence, consulting the technical manual frequently. They disconnected fuel lines, electrical connections, and coolant hoses. They unbolted the engine mounts. Within 30 minutes, the engine was free of the hull. "Now, install this one," Steiner said, pointing to a spare engine they'd found in an American supply dump. A completely different unit. The mechanics looked at each other, then at the manual. They lifted the replacement engine, and Brenner gasped. "The mounting points. They're identical. Every connection, every bolt hole, exactly the same." "Of course they are," Kirsch said. "Complete interchangeability. Any Sherman engine fits any Sherman hull. No adjustments, no custom fitting. Just bolt it in." 2 hours and 43 minutes after they'd started, the Sherman's engine roared to life. A complete engine change, performed by mechanics unfamiliar with the vehicle, using only basic tools. Weber was sitting on the ground, his head in his hands. "Our Tigers. Replacing an engine requires a crane, a workshop, specialized technicians, and 2 days minimum. 2 days. And the Americans can do it in a field, in 3 hours, with 3 men and a toolbox." Steiner finished. He felt physically ill, but the worst was yet to come. Kirsch had been calculating frantically in his notebook. Now he looked up, his face ashen. "Hauptmann, I've been analyzing the production data we captured from that American logistics depot last month. I thought the numbers were exaggerated, propaganda. But if this tank is any indication, tell me, in 1943, Germany produced 5,966 tanks of all types. America produced 29,497 Sherman tanks alone. That's not counting their other armored vehicles. This year, 1944, we'll be lucky to match last year's production. They're accelerating. And it's not just quantity. His voice cracked slightly. Every single one of those 29,497 tanks can be repaired in the field, using standardized parts that work in any vehicle. The silence that followed was broken only by the idle rumble of the Sherman's engine. Each man was doing the same terrible mathematics in his head. Steiner closed his notebook slowly. "Gentlemen, I need to write a report for High Command. But first, I want each of you to tell me honestly, if you were a soldier, would you rather fight in a Tiger or a Sherman?" Weber answered first. "A Tiger. Without question. It's superior in every—" "No," Brenner interrupted. "That's not what he's asking. He's asking which one you'd rather be assigned to for a month of continuous combat, knowing that breakdowns are permanent, that spare parts are scarce, that repair facilities are rare. Which tank gives you the better chance of survival?" Weber's mouth opened, then closed. His face had gone pale. "The Sherman," Kirsch whispered. "God help me, the Sherman. Because when it breaks, and it will break, I know it can be fixed. Tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that. But a Tiger, a Panther, when they break down in enemy territory, they become monuments, elaborate tombs." Steiner nodded slowly. "That's what I thought you'd say. That's what I would say too." He looked at the Sherman, still idling patiently in the morning Sunday. "This tank isn't designed to be the best. It's designed to never quit." That evening, as the sun set over the scarred French countryside, the team gathered one final time around the Sherman. They had pushed it hard all day over 200 kilometers of driving, countless gun firings, 3 simulated repairs. It sat there, engine ticking as it cooled, ready for more. "I keep thinking about the crews," Kirsch said softly. "The American boys who climb into these things. They know the armor is thin. They know a Tiger will kill them at range. They call it a Ronson, for God's sake. But they keep coming because they know the machine will keep running," Brenner finished. "The tank might not save them from an 88mm shell, but it won't abandon them with a mechanical failure. It won't leave them stranded. It's a devil's bargain, less protection, but absolute reliability." "There's something else," Steiner said. He'd been quiet for hours, his mind working through implications. "Something that terrifies me more than American production numbers or tank specifications." "What?" Weber asked. "This philosophy, this acceptance of good enough, this focus on reliability and repairability over perfection. It's not just about tanks. It's their entire military-industrial system." He gestured toward the west, toward the beaches where hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers had landed. Their rifles, their trucks, their aircraft, their logistics, all of it built on the same principle. Nothing is the best. Everything is good enough, mass-produced, and standardized. "And we built Tigers," Kirsch said numbly. "Masterpieces that spend more time broken than running." "Exactly." Steiner pulled out a flask, took a long drink, and passed it around. "We're fighting a machine that doesn't care about elegance or superiority. It cares about one thing: being there, always being there, wave after wave after wave." The artillery in the distance seemed louder now, closer. Or perhaps they were simply hearing it differently, not as the sound of battle, but as the grinding of gears in an enormous machine that would never stop, never quit, never run out of spare parts or replacement tanks. "What will you put in your report?" Weber asked. Steiner thought for a long moment. "The truth. That we've been fighting the wrong war with the wrong weapons based on the wrong assumptions. That we optimized for quality when we needed quantity. That we built art when we needed industry." He paused. "And that it's too late to change." Hauptmann Steiner stood at attention in a wood-paneled conference room that reeked of cigar smoke and desperation. Before him sat 3 officers, a general major with iron-gray hair, a logistics colonel whose uniform was immaculate despite the war, and an SS Oberfuhrer whose cold eyes never blinked. His report, 27 pages of technical analysis and terrifying conclusions, lay on the table between them. "This is defeatist nonsense," the SS officer said flatly, not bothering to look up from the document. "You're telling us that American scrap metal is superior to German engineering?" "No, Herr Oberfuhrer," Steiner replied carefully. "I'm saying their system is more effective than our system. There's a difference." The general major leaned forward. "Explain." Steiner took a breath. This was the moment that could end his career, or worse. "We've optimized for the wrong metric. We built tanks to win individual battles. They built tanks to win the war. A Tiger can destroy 5 Shermans before it's knocked out, but then it's done broken down, out of fuel, or destroyed. Those 5 Shermans? They'll be replaced by 10 more within a week, all using the same parts, the same training, the same doctrine." "You're saying we should copy them?" The logistics colonel seemed genuinely curious. "Build inferior tanks?" "I'm saying it's too late to copy them. They've had this system in place since 1942. Their entire industrial base is synchronized factories, training programs, supply chains. We would need to restart from zero, and we don't have the time or resources." The SS officer slammed his hand on the table. "Then what good is your report? You waste our time with American propaganda." "It's not propaganda," Steiner interrupted, knowing he was crossing a line. "I drove that Sherman. I timed the repairs. I calculated the numbers. Everything in this report is verifiable fact." Silence filled the room. The general major's eyes narrowed. "You understand what you're suggesting? That Germany's finest engineers, our superior technology, our Wunderwaffen, all of it is strategically irrelevant?" "Not irrelevant, sir. Insufficient." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Oberleutnant Richter, the man who had first captured the Sherman, crouched in a ditch as American artillery screamed overhead. His unit had been retreating for 3 days, harassed constantly by enemy tanks. "There!" his radio operator shouted, pointing down the road. Richter raised his binoculars. Shermans, 5 of them, advancing in formation. Behind them, more vehicles, trucks, half-tracks, supply carriers, an endless column. "Where's our armor support?" someone asked desperately. "The Tigers broke down 30 kilometers back," Richter said flatly. "Transmission failures. The Panthers are out of fuel. We're on our own." As the Shermans approached, Richter thought about Hauptmann Steiner's report, the one that had been classified secret and quietly filed away. He thought about the engines that could be swapped in 3 hours, the standardized parts, the system that never quit. One of the Shermans had crude numbers painted on its turret, 57. The 57th tank in someone's unit? The 57th replacement? It didn't matter. There would always be another Sherman. Young Kirsch sat alone in the abandoned facility, now far behind enemy lines as the Allies pushed deeper into Germany. The Sherman they'd tested was still there, gathering dust, but somehow still looking ready to run. He'd received word that Steiner was missing, presumed killed in the retreat from France. Brenner had been reassigned to a factory producing Me-262 jets, another wonder weapon that would arrive too late. Weber had simply disappeared into the chaos of the collapsing front. Kirsch walked around the Sherman one final time, running his hand along its scarred hull. "You never quit," he whispered. "That was your secret all along. Not superior armor, not a bigger gun. Just, you never quit." In his pocket was a letter, his orders to report to a Volkssturm unit. Old men and boys, handed rifles and told to stop the Allied advance. Another lost cause, in a war that had been lost the moment Germany chose elegance over endurance. As he walked out of the facility for the last time, Kirsch understood Steiner's final unwritten conclusion. Germany had built tanks for parades and propaganda films. America had built tanks for war, and war didn't care about perfection. It only cared about who was still standing when the smoke cleared. The report resurfaced one final time, found in a bombed-out ministry building by a Soviet intelligence officer. It was translated, studied, and filed away in Moscow's archives. The Americans never knew that German engineers had so thoroughly understood their philosophy. They never knew that somewhere in occupied France, a group of exhausted men had discovered the true secret of American industrial power. That secret wasn't technology. It wasn't innovation. It was something far simpler and far more terrifying. Build it good enough. Build it in massive quantities. And make absolutely certain it never stops running. The Sherman, despite all its flaws, despite being called a death trap by its own crews, despite being inferior to German tanks in almost every measurable way, had done something the Tigers and Panthers could never do. It had been there. Every day, every battle, every kilometer, from Normandy to Berlin. And that made all the difference. An elderly man stood before a restored M4 Sherman, his hand resting gently on its hull. His name tag read, Johann Kirsch, guest speaker. At 98 years old, he had traveled from Munich to tell a story that had haunted him for nearly 80 years. A group of military history students gathered around him, notebooks ready. Their instructor, a retired Army colonel, made the introduction. Dr. Kirsch was a German engineer during World War II. He has a unique perspective on American armor that I think you'll find enlightening. Kirsch smiled faintly. I was 23 years old when I first saw this tank. I thought I knew everything about engineering. I was wrong. He paused, his aged eyes distant. We all were. He began to tell them the story that captured Sherman, the midnight examination, the tests that revealed truth after terrible truth. The students listened, transfixed, as he described the horror of understanding that Germany had lost the war not on the battlefield, but in the factory. You have to understand, Kirsch said, his voice still carrying traces of a German accent. We were raised to believe that German engineering was the best in the world. And technically, it was. Our tanks had better armor, better guns, better optics. On paper, they were superior in every way. So what happened? A young cadet asked. Kirsch's expression grew somber. We met a philosophy that didn't care about better. We met a system that understood something we didn't, that in war, presence is more important than perfection. He walked slowly around the Sherman, and the students noticed he moved with a strange reverence, as if in a church. This tank won the war not because it was the best. It won because it was good enough. And there were always more of them. Always. The numbers tell the story. Kirsch pulled out a worn folder, copies of documents he'd carried for decades. Let me give you the statistics that broke us. In the entire war, Germany produced approximately 1,300 Tiger tanks. Magnificent machines. The Americans produced 49,234 Sherman tanks. 49,000. He let the numbers sink in. But production was only part of it. A Tiger tank required 300,000 man-hours to build. A Sherman required 10,000. The Americans could build 5 Shermans in the time it took us to build 1 Tiger. And maintenance? He smiled sadly. A Sherman could have its engine replaced in 3 hours with basic tools. A Tiger required 2 days and specialized equipment. When a Sherman broke down in enemy territory, it was a temporary setback. When a Tiger broke down, it became a pillbox until it was destroyed or abandoned. A student raised her hand. But didn't the Tiger have better kill ratios? I read that 1 Tiger could destroy multiple Shermans. Yes, Kirsch acknowledged. A Tiger could destroy 5, 10, even 15 Shermans before being knocked out. But there was always a 16th Sherman, a 20th, a 50th, and the Tiger, there was never a second Tiger. Once it was gone, it was gone. He pointed to the Sherman's track system. See this? Simple steel tracks. They wore out quickly, but they could be replaced by the crew in an hour. Our Tigers had overlapping road wheels, brilliant for weight distribution, terrible for maintenance. If a center wheel broke, You had to remove half the suspension system to replace it. In winter, mud would freeze between the wheels overnight, immobilizing the tank completely. We optimized for combat performance, Kirsch continued. They optimized for combat availability. We asked, how can we make this tank better? They asked, how can we make sure this tank is always ready? Different questions, different answers, different outcomes. The human cost. Kirsch's voice grew quieter. I want to tell you about my colleague, Otto Brenner. He was our chief mechanic, a man who could diagnose a problem by sound alone, who understood machines like they were living things. After he examined the Sherman, I found him sitting on the ground, crying. The students shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the kind of detail they expected in a technical lecture. I asked him what was wrong. He said, I've been training young men to maintain Tigers for 3 years. Complex, beautiful machines that require constant care. And now I realize I've been sending them to their deaths, because when those Tigers break down, and they always break down, those boys have no chance. But an American mechanic with a Sherman, he can keep his crew alive. Kirsch touched the Sherman's armor. This thin armor, this Ronson that lit up so easily, it saved more American lives than our thick armor saved German lives. Because this tank could be repaired and put back into action, our tanks became coffins. After the war, he continued, I studied industrial engineering. I wanted to understand how America had done it. And I discovered something remarkable. The Sherman wasn't designed by tank experts trying to build the perfect tank. It was designed by automotive engineers applying mass production principles. Henry Ford's assembly line philosophy applied to warfare. They treated tanks like cars, standardized parts, simple maintenance, clear manuals. Any mechanic who could fix a truck could maintain a Sherman. It wasn't elegant, but it was genius. The philosophy that won. The retired colonel spoke up. Dr. Kirsch, you're describing what we now call systems engineering. The Sherman was just one component in a larger system. Exactly. Kirsch nodded enthusiastically. That was the revelation that terrified us. The Sherman didn't need to be the best tank. It needed to be the best component in the American military-industrial system. And at that role, it was perfect. He gestured broadly. Think about the entire system. Factories that could retool quickly. Logistics networks that could ship parts anywhere. Training programs that could produce mechanics in weeks, not years. Doctrine that accepted losses because replacements were guaranteed. The Sherman was designed to fit perfectly into that system. Our Tigers and Panthers were designed to stand alone, to be superior in isolation. But war isn't fought in isolation. It's fought by systems against systems. And the American system was better than ours, even though every individual component was technically inferior. A student asked, Did anyone in the German High Command understand this? Kirsch's face darkened. Hauptmann Friedrich Steiner understood. He wrote a report explaining everything I've told you. It was marked secret and filed away. The truth was too uncomfortable, too threatening to the Nazi ideology of German supremacy. They couldn't accept that American simplicity was actually sophisticated systems thinking. Steiner disappeared during the retreat from France. I like to think he survived, went underground, lived a quiet life, but I'll never know. The final lesson. Kirsch turned to face the students directly. I'm 98 years old. I've spent my life studying engineering, teaching, consulting, and I can tell you that the lesson of the Sherman applies far beyond tanks or even warfare. In business, in technology, in any complex endeavor, perfection is the enemy of effectiveness. The best solution is often not the most elegant one, but the one that works reliably, can be maintained easily, and integrates well into your existing system. He patted the Sherman's hull affectionately. This ugly, simple, inferior tank taught me the most important lesson of my career. Don't ask, how can I make this perfect? Ask, how can I make sure this keeps working? The Germans built Tigers temperamental thoroughbreds that required expert care. The Americans built Sherman's reliable workhorses that any farmhand could operate. When you're fighting a war, you don't want thoroughbreds. You want workhorses. One of the students, a young woman who'd been taking notes furiously, looked up. "Sir, you said the Sherman saved more American lives than German armor saved German lives. But wasn't the Sherman called a death trap? Didn't crews hate it?" Kirsch smiled sadly. They hated it until they needed to repair it in the field. They hated it until they saw their disabled tank back in action the next day while German crews were still waiting for spare parts that would never come. They hated it until they survived their third, fourth, fifth combat action because the tank never quit on them. The Sherman wasn't designed to keep you from getting hit. It was designed to keep fighting after you got hit, to get you home, to be ready for the next battle. In the long run, that reliability saved more lives than any amount of armor plating. Epilogue. As the lecture concluded and students filed out, discussing what they'd learned, Kirsch remained alone with the Sherman. The museum was preparing to close, but the director had given him permission to stay a few extra minutes. He walked around the tank slowly, remembering that night in July 1944 when he'd first seen these crude welds, these simple systems, these good-enough solutions. He remembered the horror of understanding, the weight of knowledge that came too late. "We thought you were simple," he whispered to the tank. "We thought simplicity meant inferiority, but you were simple the way a hammer is simple, perfectly designed for your purpose, nothing more, nothing less." He thought about Steiner, about Brenner, about all the brilliant German engineers who had built magnificent machines that couldn't win a war. He thought about the American engineers who had built ordinary machines that could. "You taught me that genius isn't about making something more complex," Kirsch said softly. "It's about making something that works, and works, and works, and never stops working. That's the lesson I've carried for 80 years. As he turned to leave, he noticed a young soldier, an army private walking past, probably on guard duty. The private noticed him and stopped. "Are you okay, sir? Can I help you?" Kirsch smiled. "I'm fine, young man. Just saying goodbye to an old friend." "That Sherman?" The private looked at the tank. "My grandfather drove one of those in the war. Said it saved his life 3 times. Once in combat, twice with mechanical reliability, when they were cut off behind enemy lines." "Your grandfather was a wise man," Kirsch said. "I hope you'll remember his story." "Always, sir." As Kirsch walked out of the museum into the Georgia twilight, he thought about all the stories the tank represented. Not just battles won or lost, but a fundamental lesson about how to build things that matter. The Sherman had taught him that victory doesn't always go to the strongest or the fastest or the most sophisticated. Sometimes, victory goes to whoever is still standing when the smoke clears. And in war, as in life, the simple truth remains. The best weapon isn't the one that wins every battle. It's the one that's still ready to fight the next one. That was the secret German engineers discovered too late. That was the lesson that changed Johann Kirsch's life. And that was why, after all these years, he'd come to pay his respects to a simple, crude, inferior American tank that had helped win a war. Because it never quit. And in the end, that made all the difference.